Let's bring in our A-team. Brad Blakeman, former deputy assistant to President George W. Bush. Leslie Marshall, Democratic strategist, progressive radio host, and Fox News contributor. And Kristen Soltis Anderson, contributor to the Washington Examiner. I have so many questions for you, Leslie. Do you like the direction your party is going with now calls to lower the voting age, pack the Supreme Court, eliminate the Electoral College?
I think we have too much on our plate. You know what I mean? I'm sorry to say KFC does chicken because they do chicken right. That was their slogan. And I think the Democrats, in a sense, need to focus on chicken, and the Supreme Court isn't chicken. And the reason I say that is we can't look at, if you look at the court, whether you increase it to 9 or whether you increase it to 11 or you increase it to 27, as I read an article this morning, you're still going to have whichever party is in power, and whichever president, obviously, is elected from whichever party is going to have that power. I agree with actually the last line of the president's tweet is that is decided at the ballot box. But with regard to the voting age, I do think there's some merit there. Although my daughter's going to be 11, my son 12, and I'm horrified at the idea, and I shudder to think of my son driving on Los Angeles freeways. I'll be very frank, at 16 years of age in almost 4 years. 16-year-olds in the United States, they work, they pay taxes, and we have approximately 250,000 teenagers who've been tried as adults in the United States in recent years. So if they are punished as adults, if they contribute as adults, and you had said off the air about them being on their phone, I would rather them, instead of watching Dude Perfect and playing Fortnite or whatever, I would really rather them be reading and educating themselves and being a part of the political process. So why not start young? There are 14 states that have pre-registered kids at 16 and 9 at 17, and California is one of them. I think it's a good idea.
Brad?
To play off Leslie, I cry foul with regard to what the Democrats are trying to do. They're trying to get, and the president's right, what they can't get at the ballot box through legislation or just outright taking away what has been tradition. Children in America are deemed to be 16 years old. At 18, you're considered to be an adult legally. That's a legal definition. And many 18-year-olds are not even emancipated. They're not outside the house. They're still under their parents' supervision and care.
Many 22-year-olds are not.
Yeah, well, you know, 26-year-olds are. They're entitled to be on their parents. So we've pushed adolescents now to 26 if you can stay on your parents' insurance policy. Democrats wanted that. But to then reverse it and say a 16-year-old who's a child who does contribute, but they contribute to society not as an adult. They contribute as a child. They're learning the process.
Kristen, I want you to listen to Kamala Harris on Jimmy Kimmel staking out a position on something, then I'll ask you about it afterwards. Listen.
Senator Elizabeth Warren had a town hall last night, and she said that she thinks we should do away with the Electoral College. Do you agree with that?
I think that I'm open to the discussion. I mean, there's no question that the popular vote has been diminished in terms of making the final decision about who's the president of the United States, and we need to deal with that. So I'm open to the discussion.
I'm open to the discussion. That's, I guess, a way of saying I haven't really made up my mind. But my point is, in both parties, you run to the outside for the primary season. You stake out extremist positions, and you come back more to the middle for the general election. All of these Democrats who are advocating, you know, abolishing the Electoral College, can they ever walk away from that?
Well, bear in mind the difference between, say, moving to the far left on something like supporting the Green New Deal or Medicare for all, things that are more ideological positions. This is a little bit different because this isn't about ideology so much as what will help my side win, and what norms and institutions are in place that either help or hurt my side.
Same with the 16-year-old vote?
And I think whether it's things like that, you hear about this sometimes when it comes up the filibuster, depending on which side is in power. Some people want the filibuster to say, some people don't. Oftentimes when politicians are talking about these sort of norms of how we distribute power in the United States, how we run elections, people's preferences, or I should say politicians' preferences on these sorts of things tends to change based on who they think they favor. And for the last 2 decades, the Electoral College, the conventional wisdom is that it has favored Republicans because so many of these sort of red states are very large, spacious states where they have a lot of folks in the Senate, that benefits them in the Electoral College. I think the reason why you see Democrats crying foul on things like the Electoral College, et cetera, is less about principle and more about the fact that it just makes it harder for their side to win.
Meanwhile, the president has his take on all of this. He tweeted this out, number 7 in the control room. The Democrats are getting very strange. They now want to change the voting age to 16, abolish the Electoral College, and increase significantly the number of Supreme Court justices. Actually, you've got to win it at the ballot box, wrote the president. That was his take.
That's true. Don't dime the rules. The rules are as good for Republicans as it is for Democrats. If you win, to the victor go the spoils. And, you know, I think one of the reasons why Donald Trump won was on the Supreme Court. He was appealing and saying, hey, look, if you want a more conservative court, vote for me. And a lot of people did. But, you know, there's never been more of an ideological divide as there is today. There is no debate between or compromise between a 16-year-old voting. Republicans will never go for that. There is no compromise on that or the Electoral College. So the Democrats are advancing issues that there can be no common ground on.
Leslie, Dr. Bill Bennett, former education secretary, was on our air on this program yesterday and said, look, the 3 million popular vote surplus that Hillary Clinton held in the 2016 election essentially came from your home state of California, and the whole nation doesn't want California deciding who the president is. What do you think about that?
Fair enough. I don't want Texas deciding our nation's fate either, as a Democrat living in California. But if you just take California, since you brought it up, the largest state in our nation, take the smallest state, I'm sorry, Rhode Island, as another example. Is it fair to voters in these states and just to our population in general that you have the same number of representatives in the Senate in each state for a state the size of California versus Rhode Island? One of the reasons we only have less than half of the people registered to vote, and 46% is on our best day, right? One of the reasons is because people don't feel that their vote counts. And I do feel that the Electoral College is part of that. And I don't think it's wrong to change things. I know people say, we were talking about this, if it's off air, if it's not broken, don't fix it. But we've changed things a lot. There have been proposals in the past, FDR's administration, for example, to pack the court. So I don't think discussing change is bad or even making change is bad. Remember, when we had originally, when a lot of these laws were made, the United States was less than 10 times smaller than it is now.
Yeah, but to seek change for an unfair advantage, that's the problem.
Yeah, and I also think that when it comes to trying to bring about change, has something fundamentally changed in society? Has technology changed that warrants taking a look? So, for instance, let's think about the 16-year-old. Has something changed in our society where we've redefined what it means to be an adult? If we can point to many societal factors that say, look, we used to think it was 18, but now it deserves to be 16, then let's have that conversation. But I think when you see things like the Electoral College lowering the age to 16, a lot of this is coming up because one side perceives that it will give them a political advantage and the other side does not. And Republicans are guilty of doing the same thing a lot of times, too, with changes they want to make. But change is always popular when people think it's going to benefit.
Well, it's a debate that's going to continue, and all the candidates are being asked about it. Meanwhile, here's Beto O'Rourke last night with a big prediction. Number 8.
I think we can win Texas. I think we've proven that we know how to campaign. We've been to each one of those 254 counties. We've listened to the stories our fellow Texans have told us. We've incorporated it in the way that we campaign and the way in which I wish to serve.
If he wins the nomination, he's already predicted that. So, I mean,
if at first you don't succeed, try again. He's looking at Super Tuesday, Texas. So are other people. California with Harris and Massachusetts with Bernie. But don't count your chickens. And Beto is getting way far ahead too early, I think.
The problem is he didn't win Texas when he had a pretty good chance against Ted Cruz.
Well, there are a couple of things. First of all, he came within less than 3 percentage points. And, you know, even my Republican buddies will say, in Texas, that's an amazing feat in itself. But you're right. No, he didn't win. But more people do come out in a general than they do in a midterm. But you got to look at the numbers. And that's all elections are about. The majority of voters, overwhelming majority of voters in the state of Texas are and have been, and I think that's changing, but are right now Republican. The numbers just aren't there, in my opinion, for him to win Texas. Can he get close and get within a percentage, you know, like he did with the Senate race?
But if he doesn't win, if he doesn't win Texas, he's done, isn't he?
No, I don't think so, but I don't think he's going to be the nominee, and I honestly hope he isn't going to be the nominee. I think Beto would be a better VP to another nominee who I think could be beat the president.
Kristen, here's the latest CNN poll on the Democratic choice for president. Joe Biden not yet in, but he leads that poll at 28%. Bernie Sanders and Kamala Harris are on the rise. Beto O'Rourke at the bottom of that list, 11%. Kristen.
I think this is a really good poll for Joe Biden, in part because if you looked at polls 4 years ago, Joe Biden was really hanging out in the single digits, that Hillary Clinton had kind of taken up all of the oxygen, and there just wasn't a ton of hunger for Joe Biden in the Democratic Party. Now, you have a much more open field, and Joe Biden is now getting about 3 times the size of the slice of the Democratic Party that he was looking at 4 years ago. I think there is a portion of the party that views him as being someone who could compete in some of those blue wall states that Trump flipped, and I think that's what makes him formidable. The question is he going to spend his campaign apologizing for positions that he's held in the 80s, the 90s, things that are not really where the mainstream of the Democratic Party is, or does he say, you know what, I was Barack Obama's guy, and that's why I should be your guy?
He's also asking for big donors to come in and kick in money because Beto O'Rourke, for instance, has raised so much so quickly.
Yeah, he'll be a little late to the money, but Joe is a well-known commodity. People feel comfortable with him. The problem is, as you point out, he has a record that he has to defend. He also has to resist the temptation of going so far left that he becomes selectable, but probably not electable. So Joe Biden is probably the most worrisome for Republicans. But I think a lot of his worry.
Sometimes I wish I could have a camera on each of you. The body language and the head shaking and the nodding going on. Final thoughts from you, Leslie, before we go.
Yeah, the reason Republicans are worried, as they should be, this is Joe Biden's time. This is Joe Biden's time. And if my party, looking at those numbers, I get a little scared because you see Joe Biden, you see Bernie, they're very close. Yeah. Hello, I saw this in 2016. But the difference this time is I do believe, and I'm hoping that the party has learned that being angry and pouting when your candidate is not on stage is not the way to win. Uniting is take a page from the Republican playbook and unite. Joe Biden can beat Donald Trump because he's a very similar personality to Trump. No malarkey, shoot from the hip. And the bottom line is he will win Wisconsin, Michigan.
Seems like you have more to say. We're going to have the A-Team back end of the hour. So thank you for joining us.
And Leslie's already got the bumper stickers ready for her car. This is Joe Biden's time.
Thank you.
I'm terribly concerned that when you talk about the New York Times these days, when you talk about the Washington Post these days, we're talking about organizations that I believe have, in fact, decided as organizations that Donald J. Trump is bad for the United States.
That was Ted Koppel calling out mainstream newspapers for bias against President Trump. The A-Team is back. Welcome back to all of you, Kristen, Leslie, and Brad. Brad, first I'm going to throw to our colleague Britt Hume on with Tucker Carlson reacting to this last night.
I did work with Ted Koppel for many years. He's old school, much as I am. We come out of the same tradition, which is neutrality in news coverage, opinions reserved for columnists and editorial writers. And in broadcast journalism, you have certain commentators and you have correspondents who cover the news. And those lines of separation have become increasingly blurred. And in the age of Trump, as Koppel suggested, they've gone completely out the window.
Brad?
Old school should be fair school. I mean, I don't think that the fair and balanced reporting that we expect should be old school. I think we should return to that. And there's a visceral hate for this president by the liberal media. And it's quite apparent. You don't have to take my word for it. Just turn on their stations, read their materials. I believe that Ted Koppel's right.
Leslie?
I do agree with Ted Koppel. There was a time if somebody said, where did you get that story? The New York Times. Then it was believable, and that's sad. The way I learned in Journalism 101 is you report the facts, you never inject yourself into the story and make yourself a part of the story, and you would never know the person reporting the story, whether in print, radio, or television's opinion. And I think whether you dislike the president or you love the president, if you're a journalist, if you're not opining for a living, as talk show hosts and others do, then you should just be reporting the facts, because otherwise it does a disservice to journalism and to the people that are getting the information.
Begs me to quote the late Gwen Ifill, my job is to not know what I think. Journalists don't live by that.
And this this was, I mean, in the Trump era, you've had, I believe it's the New York Times, their slogan, you know, the truth matters now more than ever. And my sort of thought is, didn't the truth always matter? That there does seem to be, I think, this notion that we are in this moment where journalists now, do they have some sort of unique responsibility to really treat this president differently than past presidents, because the president himself is treating the media differently in some ways than past presidents has. But I think when you look at polls on what people think, it's not just conservatives and Republicans that have increasingly said, I don't really trust what I see in the media. And I think that mainstream news organizations really do have to reckon with the fact that they've lost the trust not just of conservatives and not just of people who support the president.
I got into journalism school in the mid-'70s when it was really hard to get in because all the president's men had just come out and everybody wanted to get into journalism and bring down a president.
Right, and it's become a herd mentality. I worked for 3 presidents. So many times I hung out with the press. And I've been in events where the press didn't even go into the event. They stayed on the bus, and then they would decide what the story was. Well, what do you think he meant by that? I'm going to say this. That's not the way the system should be. The system should be what we expect in our courts, a jury. Give us the facts. We'll decide what the story is based on facts. We'll weigh them. We'll judge them for ourselves. We don't need to be told what to think or how to think. And unfortunately, that's what we get today.
Brad, Leslie, Kristen, our A team today.
Thank you.
Thanks for your thoughts.
Thank you.